what could be better than the Leeds United hat when we're talking about memories of Leeds? This is for Lucille, who asked for it, so it's her fault. I'm talking about Leeds in 1950s. I was 6 at the beginning of the 50s, and we all lived around about Leopold Street. Dad's shop was on Chapeltown Road, and at the beginning we lived there. And we used to trot up the road, up Chapeltown Road, and the first turning on the right, maybe it was the second, was Leopold Street. And it was a very Jewish area then. You could walk around without being frightened of being beaten up or whatever. Try doing it now. And we'd go there to Grandma's, and that's what you want to hear about, isn't it? Grandma's house, Grandma and Dad, it was a semi-detached house as far as I remember, or maybe it was terraces, I can't remember, but it was enormous. On the front there was Leopold Street, and the back there was Harriet Street, which was like a back road. Harriet Street was important as much because the back house was there. What was the back house? The back house was the toilet. And I remember, one of the first things I remember is when we went to the toilet, it doesn't matter if it was rain, snow, whatever, you'd sit there shivering, and you'd take in the newspaper and tear it up into little pieces, not because you're going to, when you finish reading it, for obvious reasons. And that was that. And then you'd drudge your way back into the little yard at the back, which was paved, and everything in Leeds, the book 50 Shades of Grey, that was Leeds. There were 50 shades of different greys, most of them were sombre. And the courtyard was black, paved with green moss between the cracks, and then there was this little railing, and down the railing you go downstairs into the auntie's flat, and I'll talk about that. The whole house was loads of floors, and the bottom floor, which led out in the front on Leopold Street into the garden. And also, Grandad had his workshop there. He had this old Singer treadle. You remember the Singer, but with sewing machines? And he used to have one. Every Jewish house had a Singer sewing machine. Every Jew in Leeds knows what's a nice piece of schmatter. And they say, oh, that's nice. Why don't you have a suit made out of it? But we all know what was hand-stitched, and, we look at it. We still do. I still can look at any piece of tailoring, and I can tell you whether it's, it's been well stitched, it's been hung properly, that the sleeves are in the right place, and and you look at the lapels and you see when it's hand stitched and when it isn't. It's bespoke tailoring, and all the Jews were in it. All of them, literally. Every house had the Schneider. They all had it. They all were good at sewing. To this day, I can still sew. I can stitch up stuff better than most of the women I know, without being chauvinistic, of course. But yeah, that was something we knew. I remember I used to, because I had good eyes, I would thread the needle for, I think it was for my mum mainly, but I think also for my grandparents, my granddads. Both my granddads were tailors, amongst other things. It was a part-time job. It was also, Grandad was selling insurance or something like that. He was into all sorts of stuff. Most of the lads then went to the markets. They were market boys, and they were flogging anything that moved, and some things that didn't move, and some things that shouldn't have been moved. But they were into it. It was a different world. And at the front of the house, I'm saying, there was this big garden, and you'd go downstairs, very single stairs, and there's this magic place which was the auntie's flat, and the front part of it was Grandad's singer machine. I can't remember where it was exactly, but it was somewhere around the front. And the Burzes, the four aunts, the spinster aunts, the three spinster aunts. Leah got married when she was about 50, but Faye and Ray never did. And Faye was my favourite, and I think I was hers too, I think, at some point. And they were amazing. When they were younger, when Grandad Burrs was alive, he was an arch lunatic. I think we got most of our lunacy came from him, from this side of the family, and also a bit from Grandad Benjamin, who got a good sense of humour. The family sense of humour comes from him. I remember Auntie Anthea telling me that they used to have, before we were born, they had these Auntie Anthea's, your mum, Anthea. She told me about these, to have these family weddings. And Izzy Benjamin would stand up and say, right, it's time for snake dance. All them that snaked in can snake out again. Because in weddings, a lot of people, they were big and you didn't know who everybody was, and a lot of people went there for a free meal. They go along for a free meal, and that's what they did, you know. And Izzy was wise to this. But to get back to to what I was saying, the Grandad Burs was an arch communist, socialist, God knows what he was, and the Burs family were in and out of Russia like yo-yos. They got thrown out by the Tsar, and then they went back for the Mensheviks, and then the Bolsheviks threw them out. And great Grandad Burs was a very, very left-wing socialist. He worked to get Keir Hardie elected. How the hell he managed to get that, I don't know. But I do know that he worked with Harold Wilson's dad, and they were good friends. You know, they were gung-ho left-wing and were socialists, and they got every day, they got the Daily Worker. Now, if that wasn't enough, Auntie Ray would iron it so that the print wouldn't go on His Majesty Grandad Bertie's hands, and he would, you know, he was father of 4 daughters and a Russian. He was king of the you know, they were very Russian. I think Grandad Benjamin was from the Polish extraction, but the Russian impression, I remember there was a great big samovar in the living room upstairs, but I haven't got there yet. And the Burses would sit and plot things. I don't know, they were always into something. Ray in particular was always keeping lists, and she knew everybody's birthday. Lawrence has inherited some of it, but he's minor league compared to what Ray was into. She had everybody's birthday and every child and everything, and they all got cards, and this was Ray. But it wasn't like that. Everything was systematic. Everything had its place, and God help if you moved it. Now, Faye was a raving left-winger, and Faye was the only Jew, apart from the owner of Hepton's. And Hepton's, he was the Jewish owner, and Faye ran the union, her and another woman, and every 2 minutes they were on strike. And Faye would curse him and tell him, you know, and then we say, and that was Faye. But Faye was always laughing. And Faye used to give me cigarettes when we lived in Osmonthorpe. Faye used to give me cigarettes. But I told my dad when Faye, when he was dying, and I told him what had happened when I was a kid, 1956. I was 12. The Russians invaded, the Russians got thrown out of Hungary, out of Budapest. There was a big uprising, and they got thrown out. And the Russian tanks got to the border, and they came back again. And everybody was watching the BBC. That was the kind of thing you did then. Everything was always round the radio. Like, there was another time when the Flying Enterprise sank. Everybody was round the watching what happened and how it happened and why it happened. And the same thing happened with the Hungary. They were around, and they got to the borders. They came back, and the 2 aunties called me. Leah was never part of this, and the 2 aunties called me, and they sat me down downstairs. I can see it now, and they said to me, Michael, don't you believe a word what the bourgeoisie BBC are telling you. The Russian workers have gone in to liberate the Budapest workers from the fascists. Who the fascists were, I got bloody clue. I said, yes. And Dad said to me, they always thought that I was politically orientated and I was supposed to be the next generation, the believer. And that's where you have that was part of the setup. I'll tell you some more some other time. I've done 10 minutes, it's a long time. But I'm enjoying telling it, so maybe next week I'll do some more. Look after yourselves meanwhile.